In our latest update, we have now added NBA fantasy score projections to our optimizer. On the surface, reading and fully understanding what the optimizer is displaying can be confusing, but this is why I'm here to explain what you're looking at. And to fully understand this, let's explain what is displayed on the front end and go over the calculations. To preface this video, I must state that there's no active market for fantasy score projections, meaning that there's no universal sportsbooks lines for fantasy score player props. This is because each website has their own formula behind fantasy score projections, and therefore we can't just automatically pull fair odds for fantasy scores. But what we can do is we can easily project what they would be given the data we have from other player prop markets. For instance, let's take a look at Darius Garland's projected fantasy score using DraftKings data. As you can see in column K, DraftKings points line is set to 21.5, with their overline being set to minus 110, and their underline being set to minus 115. This would indicate that the fair odds percentage of him to hit the over of 21.5 would be 48.99%. So theoretically speaking, if we took DraftKings' fair odds percentage of 48.99% to go over 21.5, we really should decrease this projection by 1.01%, thus giving us a DraftKings projection of 21.28. So just to recap here, we're saying that DraftKings, based on their fair odds percentage of 48.99%, that he really is projected 21.28 points tonight. By taking this data across the board for his rebounds, assists, steals, block shots, and turnovers, we can put this into a fantasy score calculation on Prizepicks. And we can do this by looking at the score chart here on Prizepicks. Darius Garland's near even line on DraftKings is then multiplied times 1.2 points. Then his assist line, blocks, steals, and then minus 1 point for every near even line turnover. All those points are then added together to get a final fantasy score projection. We then do this for every single book on the DG Fantasy Optimizer. Those book raw projections are then displayed under the NBA tab under Prizepicks Fantasy Scores. Under this tab, you can see the raw projections by each sportsbook, and then the average sportsbook fantasy score. To take it one step further, you can even compare it directly to Prizepicks' fantasy score. Now, under the All Sports Prizepicks Optimizer tab, you'll see these raw projections displayed a little bit differently. As you can see, these fantasy score projections are now displayed as a fair odds percentage. Fantasy score line approximations derive from how far away the books lines are from Prizepicks' fantasy score projections. We come up with a final projection, as you saw, and then immediately compare that final projection to Prizepicks'. We then use the Poisson distribution to show what the percent chance would be for that player to go over or under that specific Prizepicks fantasy score. This approximation is calculated by using a weighted average percent change of all props used in that fantasy score formula, and then how that percent change is affected those player props historically. For instance, just throwing a number out there, if Hield's points change 4% fair odds for every point he scores, we then take that into consideration when putting together a weighted average percent change. We then do that for every stat category included in Prizepicks' fantasy score projection: the points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and turnovers. We then find a final percent change for every 1 point difference in a fantasy score projection for Buddy Hield. In this exact example below, we determined that Hield moves 2.4% for every one fantasy score difference between Prizepicks. Since we can see his raw projection is now 25.09, we are giving him a 56.09% chance to hit the under. This equates to minus 127 fair odds. At the end of the day, I want to give you guys the best plus EV plays by displaying what the percent odds would be given the discrepancy between fantasy scores on Prizepicks and the books. By keeping everything uniform on the front end, I decided to display this as a fair odds line. But you also have the ability to scroll over to the NBA tab and look at the raw fantasy score projections.